Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Okay, what problem are we going to solve today?
Money, money, money.
We have a major problem, but it's ongoing. I want to deal with foreign expenditures, foreign military expenditures, because it looks like the administration has changed their tune. You know, a couple months ago when Carter was going around, we can cut back, and hysteria broke out, and the lobbyists came in, AEI came in, and Heritage came in, and I don't know, they must be able to scare the administration, because even if they had an inkling, or whether they're fibbing all along, that they were willing to cut back, no more. Now Obama has changed his tune, and they're talking about increasing. They said the defense spending, but you know, I don't believe it's defense spending. It's a military spending. It's a welfare system. So the headline this morning was Republicans gloat over Obama's about face on military spending, and they're gloating. The two big gloaters. Can you imagine that McCain would gloat over that and be happy? I got you. So the Neocons are gloating, and in the House, in charge of the House Military Committee is Thornberry. He's gloating too, and we won. So they're going to get the money, and but I guess you have to pay attention. They describe grave dangers out there, and there's a lot of people out there with weapons, and a lot of people here want to invade our country and destroy our liberty. So I guess we have to listen to their arguments. But do you buy into their great concern about the reason we need to spend so much more money on a military? In this case, it's particularly dealing with Europe.
Yeah, I think it, as you've always pointed out, has a lot more to do with military Keynesianism than an actual threat. But you know, what this specifically refers to are a few cuts that were in the works for a few systems. The A-10 Warthog, for example, and the Tomahawk missile was to be cut in favor of newer, more expensive programs. And so they sort of split the difference and said, okay, let's just have both. Yeah. And let's get the F-35, which is a piece of junk, and we'll keep the A-10s, and we'll do the Tomahawks and the Super Hornets as well. So.
But you know, when our country's in such dire straits economically, you know, and nobody knows what the future will bring, and debt is hanging over the students and everybody else, they're in desperate shape. It's amazing that the American people are apathetic. Well, I guess it's not too amazing, but they're too apathetic to worry about this, and they don't pay enough attention that this is very big bucks that they're going to spend, and if they do this, of course, nobody feels the immediate harm. It comes later on. But they're claiming they have to have an enemy. You have to have somebody who's coming to get us. And if you're a peacemaker, you're in big trouble. You know, because if you're a peacemaker, the saying goes that you are unpatriotic and you don't care about the danger the country's in. So right now, this particular expenditure is being justified because of ISIS. And the reality is ISIS is horrible, and yet our policies did so much to create them. And also, the other thing is we got to defend ourselves against China. Well, I think there's enough economic problems for both of us that we don't need to worry about sending more ships, and yet we do. We send more ships over there. But the other thing is, since this is dealing a little bit more with Europe, Russia is a big threat. And here, with our encouragement, they're talking about sending 40,000 troops to Lithuania. I wonder how that's going to make you or I feel safer, or any American. How can that make an American feel safer when I don't think Russia's about to invade? They're certainly not going to invade America. And why do we need another Cold War?
Yeah, this is unfortunately the perception they put out, that there's a huge, grave threat, terrify everyone, and then they can spend willy-nilly. You know, we just put up on the Institute site an article by Danielle Ryan, who's a very good writer, and her first line is, Putin is about to invade the Baltics again. You know, because she said, what a coincidence, just a few days after the Pentagon announced that it's going to quadruple its military spending in Europe. And this is up from $789 million this year to $3.4 billion next year. Just days after it says it's going to quadruple its budget, Now all of these think tanks and different organizations like the Atlantic Council have come out with new reports that Russia is ready to invade the Baltics.
Yeah, and Russia, our budget's 10 times bigger than Russia. They have their concerns, and they're not pussycats, but you know, and they're very active in Syria. But it looks like they may have a stronger international law argument about being in Syria than us going 6,000 miles and just saying, oh, Assad has to go, and just bombing the living daylights out of them. So that is one problem that we have. What about Kerry the other day? I don't know if he actually said this, but he said when people were urging him, get in there and start bombing more in Syria. He says, I don't know whether that's a good idea. I'd have to bomb Russia. So he says he wasn't looking forward to it. Now, whether he said that or not, it's probably pretty true. Why should we be in there? And when Russia's in there, and they've sort of settled things down a bit compared to you know, where ISIS, when they were actually attacking ISIS, where we haven't. So it's fascinating if it weren't so serious, you know, and so crazy.
Well, it's never good to cheer bombing, but in this case, you know, Russia, along with the Syrian army, have been attacking ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the U.S., instead of cheering it on, is blaming them, saying they're making things worse. But you know, the Syrian army was on the verge of defeat when Russia came to its aid. They were asked to come in and help, and they came and helped. And if they had been defeated, it would have been ISIS in charge. So it's the media hyping this thing up. On one hand, ISIS is the worst thing ever, and then when someone comes to try and is actually very effective. You know, Aleppo is about to go back to the Syrian army. It's been occupied for a number of years by extremists. When these things happen, then they attack the people that are defending.
And of course, the only way I can explain it, which I've tried to many times, and why the people and the Congress goes along with it, is that the propagandists, whether they're government people or media people, is that if you don't do it, then you're unpatriotic and you don't care, and you're going to make our country unsafe. Of course, from our viewpoint, we see it's going to bankrupt our country, it's going to make us less safe, has nothing to do with defense, and it's very, very dangerous. Ultimately, it leads to more loss of liberties here at home, because under war conditions, and we're under permanent war conditions now, that's when our government is very intrusive. So our liberties are being lost, but it's not being lost to Al-Qaeda. It's being lost to our own government. And I figure, you know, since 1990, we've been there. I bet you there isn't a year since 1990 that we didn't bomb somebody, you know, and that's, 25 years. And it's ongoing. It's a long period of time. And yet they're going to be able to do this and hype this up and saying, well, you know, we got to stop ISIS. And of course, as dangerous as ISIS is, having a policy of intervention and interference and occupation and bombing people and innocent people being killed, it is the recruiting tool. I don't know whether they don't believe it or just they don't want to believe it, but for people who pay attention and people in the know recognize this as a fact.
You know, the U.S. likes to go around the world telling the countries that they must fight corruption. And corruption is a bad thing. But what we've been talking about today is there's no other word to define it but corruption. And this is how it works. We've talked about it before. You talked about AEI and Heritage. Those and all of the other policy think tanks in D.C., they're primarily funded by the military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin gives a bunch of money to these organizations, and then they come out with a report about the next great threat and to address that threat. And then the media picks up on these reports. Experts have said a new threat looming from X. Yeah. And they scare the American people, and then the lawmakers jump in and they appropriate more money to Lockheed. So Lockheed gives $500,000 to one of these think tanks, and they get $1 billion, $10 billion weapon system. This is corruption, plain and simple, and the American people are getting ripped off.
Yeah, and you know, Obama on occasion does something that we think is okay, and all of a sudden he shifts gears and goes in the opposite direction. But the American people just seem to be oblivious to this, and I think that's where the real problem comes, is that they don't pay enough attention. When they do, they usually come down on the side of peace. You know, why go and aggravate the situation? But sometimes our governments then, they pay too much attention if you have a vote. You know, that's why I imagine Obama and others didn't want to have the use of military force, and because it'll call attention to it, because they can do what they want anyway, you know, and serve the interests of whatever they're doing, and they shift from day to day.
Well, and also look at going back to this corruption, look at how a lot of the mainstream media is owned by companies with ties to the defense contractors as well. So you have this sort of endless loop of information that most Americans who don't tune into shows like this or look at the Ron Paul Institute's website or all the wonderful alternative media that's available, sadly the vast majority of America still does not turn to that, although they're tuning in more and more, but they're trapped in this cycle of listening to these lies that are being constantly pumped into their living rooms.
I was fascinated and chuckled a little bit about the comments made by somebody in the Polish administration, because we and NATO promised him, if you join NATO, he said they promised us many new lucrative military bases. so they want some of the action, and they're disappointed with that. So it is an economic thing that it builds up, and it's good for jobs and all these things. And I still think that might influence even Obama, because the economy is going down now. The stock market's in big trouble, and he's getting ready to leave. And if he leads to, you know, cutting a nickel out of defense, but like you pointed out, they probably aren't even going to cut. It's just shifting some funds around. But he doesn't want to have any thought that he could be blamed for this. So he would use it just like so many people do. And there's still this mentality that wars are a good way to get out of recessions and depression. You know, that's been around for a long time.
You know, the Polish example is perfect, because what does it demonstrate? It demonstrates that Poland really doesn't believe that there is a military threat, because if they really thought the Russians were about to come into Europe, they wouldn't want to paint a target on their back. So they obviously don't believe that there's a threat. They want the economic benefits that Germany had for all these decades of having these high-spending American military guys hanging around.
Yeah, and if they were really worried, maybe they would maybe they would think that they could build their military themselves, you know, to prepare the people. Maybe they would make sure they all understood what a Second Amendment would mean, so that if anybody comes marching in, they can take care of themselves. But that isn't the case. There's so much economic activity when you talk about weapons, and we've talked about this so much about when they build bombers, they usually put parts of the bombers in almost all the states. So every congressman, we're going to do it. It's good for jobs. That's atrocious as far as I'm concerned, because they never have understood the lesson of instead of what, the broken win philosophy. That just the fact that you put money in military and it looks like you're creating jobs and things. Where would that money have gone if it would have gone into education or production or building houses? Instead, we have this terrible, terrible economy that keeps crashing down on us. You know, young people, the situation's so bad, young people don't even expect to buy houses. I mean, they're so loaded with debt. And not only are they loaded with the debt from their college education, but their generation is loaded with the debt of the country too, because if interest rates go up, and eventually they will, or just paying back the principal takes a lot of money, you know, out of production. So the new generation will have to pay for this, and they may pay just by not ever getting a job and suffering and going on welfare and all these things. So it's a real mess, but it's the philosophy of government intervention that deficits don't matter, that you can print money and you need if you need it, and they don't have much interest in understanding, the business cycle. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the key to it. If you ever want to understand exactly what's going on, you have to understand the business cycle. The Fed has gotten away with putting the blame on somebody else for too long. Every time there's been a type of a boom, they took credit for it. Whenever it went down, they took credit for getting us out of the recession. Well, right now, for the past 15 years, I don't think they've ever gotten us out of the recession that started at the beginning of this century, and it got much worse in 08 and 09. And this one that is occurring right now is going to be much worse. But we can lay it at the doorsteps of the Federal Reserve, because it's so gross distortion, whether we spend the money on the military, we spend it on welfare, we spend it on big government and all the benefits. So that is the real problem. So Yes, we have to understand the principles of liberty. We have to understand the role of government in a society like that, and that is to protect liberty. But we also have to understand how the finances occur. You know, just taxation never gets enough money for the government, and that is why they have taxation. They do pretty well and a lot of harm, but then they start borrowing, and if the credit is good, you know, and our credit has been good worldwide, you can borrow a lot of money, but then if you issue the world currency, the reserve currency, then you can print at will. And that will have to be addressed. And I think if you keep an eye on the markets today and what's going on, you will realize that this is a serious, serious problem, and it can only be solved with the principles of liberty. And that includes sound money and limited spending, and that you don't justify deficits. And that is something that makes politicians very unhappy. So nobody's really advocating that. Someday the American people better stand up and say, this is what we want. The government doesn't ever deliver what they promise, so why don't you just leave us alone and let us take care of ourselves? That to me would be a much better solution, because what you're seeing now is total failure of government, not only in this country but around the world. Keynesian interventionism is a failed policy, and it is now ending, so we better be prepared. The answers are out there, and they're all related to the concept of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.